My name is K. Kanajyoti and I'm from the Department of Microbiology from Telangana Tribal Welfare Residential Degree College for Women at Nizamabad. And today I would like to discuss about the ultrastructure of a prokaryotic cell. So before we discuss about the in detail about the prokaryotic cell, I would like to give a brief introduction about the basic differences between a prokaryotic cell and an eukaryotic cell. So here, as we can see in the diagram here, the prokaryotic cell is one in which it does not, the major or the prominent difference between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell is that the prokaryotic cell does not have a demarcated nucleus, while on the contrary, the eukaryotic cell has a proper nucleus, that is, the genetic information or the DNA is present enclosed within a double membrane structure. Apart from that, the prokaryotic cell lacks any cell organelles except from the ribosomes. While in case of eukaryotic cell, it contains the cytoplasm contains many different types of organelles like the mitochondria, the chloroplast, the endoplasmic reticulum, and many other organelles. Now, each of this organelle performs specific function and it is enclosed within a double membrane structure. While in case of prokaryotic cell, all the functions, be it metabolism, be it uptake of the nutrients or the excretion of the waste products or the protein synthesis or any other function, the synthesis of ATP or the photosynthetic processes, everything, the respiration, everything occurs within the cytoplasm itself. There is no demarcation, there is no isolation of these organelles or the functions in a prokaryotic cell. So that actually forms a major contrast between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. Let's look at a few general aspects of the prokaryotic cell and then we will go on with the detailed description of each of these structures. Now, if you look at the prokaryotic cell, or in now from now on we'll be discussing about bacteria. So I'll talk only regarding bacteria. So when we talk about bacteria, these are unicellular and microscopic microorganisms. That means we cannot see them with the naked eye. We need the help of a microscope to see these bacterial structures. Now, the study of the bacteria is called as bacteriology, and these are grouped as prokaryotes because they lack a proper nucleus. In prokaryotes, it is described as a nucleoid. When you look at the distribution of these microorganisms or bacteria, they are cosmopolitan in distribution or omnipresent. That means they are present everywhere on the body, inside the body, or in the environment that we live in, the food that we take, the water that we drink, everything contains different types of microorganisms which could either be harmful or useful to the body. Now, these microorganisms are also highly resistant to adverse environmental conditions. When we look at the shape and the arrangement of these microorganisms, the most prominent and the most common shapes are the spherical and the rod-shaped bacteria. If the bacterium is spherical, it is designated as the coccus. And if it is rod shaped, it is called as bacillus. And within the coccus also, there are different types of arrangements. So if the coccus is arranged singly or it exists singly, it is called as a monococcus. If it exists in pairs, it is called as a diplococcus. And if it exists as a chain or as a beads on a chain, it is called as the streptococcus. And if the bacteria exist as dysregulated grape bunches, they are called as staphylococcus. And finally, if they appear as bunches of 4, they are called as tetracoccus. And if in bunches of 8, they are called as sarcina. Now, all these arrangements are because of the angle or in which the bacteria are dividing. Once the bacteria divide, whether they are dividing horizontally or vertically or diagonally, depending upon that, after the cell division, when they do not separate, they form these specialized structures. When we talk about rod-shaped bacteria, as I told you, they are called as bacillus. Now, these bacilli also occur as monobacillus, that is single bacillus, diplobacillus, that is two bacilli arranged side by side, and streptobacillus, where 2 or 3 bacilli are arranged one beside the another. However, we cannot see Staphylobacillus. Rather, we can see palisade kind of arrangement where one bacilli is attached to the tip of the other bacilli, or they are arranged vertically, they are attached vertically, and they appear as if they are stacked. That is called as a palisade arrangement. Apart from this, we also can see Cocobacillus. That is, some bacteria, they do not have a proper spherical shape, and neither do they have a proper rod shaped. They are in between, so they are designated as Cocobacillus. And apart from that, these bacteria, some bacteria also appear as club shaped, or filamentous, or stalk like, or star shaped, or rectangular shape, and a few others. And there are also bacilli which appear in the form of spirals, or in the form of comma shaped bacteria. Vibrios are a very good example of comma shaped bacteria, while spirali and spirochetes are examples of spiral bacteria. They appear, they have a spring-like shape. If you look at the size of the bacteria, if you compare them with the eukaryotic microorganisms or a eukaryotic cell, they are about 1/10 of the size of the eukaryotic cell, and they have a diameter of about 1 to 2 microns, and a length of about 5 to 10 microns. The smallest bacteria is called as Mycoplasma genitalium, which has a diameter of about 200 to 300 nanometers, while the longest or the largest bacterium is called as Thiomargarita nambiensis, which has a diameter of about 100 to 300 micrometers. And when we talk about the nutrition, they could be autotrophic, heterotrophic, symbiotic, or parasitic. Autotrophic in the sense they prepare their own food material. They use light energy, they use water, they take carbon dioxide from the environment, and they prepare their own food material. They do not depend upon any other organism for their livelihood or for their existence. Phototrophic bacteria are very good examples for this group of microorganisms. While the heterotrophic bacteria, they cannot make their own food, or they cannot make their own nutrients, and that is the reason they depend upon the environment for the absorption, or for the acquiring of nutrients. Saprophytic microorganisms are a very good example for this. So these microorganisms, they depend upon the dead and the decaying organic matter, and they absorb these nutrients from the decaying matter that is present in the surrounding. And the next group of bacteria, that is symbiotic bacteria, they form associations with other microorganisms or other plants. So they exchange nutrients from the they give certain nutrients, and they take certain nutrients from the plant. So that is a symbiotic association. And finally, the parasitic bacteria. These bacteria depend upon other organisms for their nutrition, and slowly they kill, or they cause disease in the organism on whomever they are depending. Right. And if you look at the reproduction, they have asexual and sexual modes of reproduction. Asexual reproduction, and the most common type of reproduction, is by binary fission, wherein a microorganism grows to its fullest size. An invagination appears in the middle of the organism. The genetic material duplicates and is separated to either ends, and the invagination that is formed, it deepens to the middle of the cell, and then ultimately it divides the cell into two daughter cells, two identical daughter cells. So that is the most common type of asexual reproduction that is carried out by bacteria. Now, this binary fission, under favorable conditions, the most common studied bacterium, that is E. coli, under favorable conditions, it divides every 20 minutes. So at the end of every 20 minutes, you can get a doubled number of the bacilli, whatever number you started with. And the second type of asexual reproduction is the conidia formation. Certain filamentous bacteria, they produce structures called as conidia on their at the end of their at the tip of their filament. So these conidia, they break off, and then when they fall onto a suitable medium, they again grow back to a proper filamentous bacteria. And another type of asexual reproduction is the budding, wherein a bud or an extravasation appears on the cell, which later grows and then separates off, producing a new bacteria. On the other hand, the sexual, rather actually we can call it a pseudosexual mode of reproduction occurs in bacteria. Now, as I mentioned, in asexual reproduction, the bacteria are reproducing, but however, there is no genetic modification that is happening in them. So there is requirement of genetic modification or genetic alteration for the bacterium to acquire new characteristics, to acclimatize to new environmental conditions, to acclimatize to new food environment, food that is available, nutrition that is available. So for that, they require certain special characteristics or genetic modification. Now that happens through three modes, which is called as conjugation, transformation, and transduction. Conjugation is a process where an F plus bacterium mates with an F minus bacterium and then transfers the F plasmid from one bacterium to the plus bacterium to the minus bacterium. So this F plasmid will give special characteristics to the F minus bacterium. So here this conjugation occurs with the help of certain specialized structures which are present on the F plus plasmid. They are designated as the 6 pili or F pili. And transformation is the process wherein any dead microorganism, when it releases its genetic information to the outside, that is DNA to the outside, certain bacteria which are able to take up this DNA, they take up, and then they conjugate this external DNA to their own chromosome, and thereby they get new characteristics. That is, they transform by taking up the genetic information. And the last one is transduction, wherein virus is mediating as a transferring agent of the genetic material from between one bacterium to another bacterium. So the DNA transfers from one bacterium to another through the viral vector. So that is designated as transduction. Now, if you look at the significance of these microorganisms, most of them are actually useful to us because they form a part of our normal flora that is present. They are present on the skin, inside our body. They produce various chemicals. They maintain the pH of the skin and the body. They fight against pathogenic microorganisms, and thereby they will protect. They actually protect our body against pathogenic microorganisms. So they are mostly useful to us. And these microorganisms, they also can be exploited to produce vaccines, enzymes, and commercially important products on a large scale, on an industrial scale. Now, however, on the other hand, some of them are harmful and they also cause diseases in the body, either it be it human body or plant body or animal body, whatever it may be, in the organs or in the host they are living in, they might cause diseases also. And they also cause contamination of the food material, particularly in the packaged food material. They cause contamination and they might sometimes cause serious illnesses. Now let us come to the actual topic, which is the ultrastructure of the bacterial cell. Now, this ultrastructure can be studied under two subheadings: structures outside the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, and structures that are present inside the plasma membrane. Now, coming to the structures outside the plasma membrane, we have the slime layer and the capsule, flagella, fimbriae, pili, spinae, and the cell wall. While structures that are inside the cell membrane, we have mesosomes, the photosynthetic apparatus, various types of cytoplasmic inclusions, the ribosomes, storage granules, the nucleoid, plasmids, and finally endospores. Now let us look at each of them in detail. Coming to the first one, the slime layer. Now, slime layer and capsule. Certain microorganisms, they produce a gummy or a sticky substance which is called as glycocalyx. Now, this glycocalyx can either be made up of polypeptides or sugars, depending upon the type of organism. And also, the arrangement of this glycocalyx varies between bacteria. In some bacteria, the glycocalyx is loosely arranged as a fluffy material, and when you wash it, it can be easily washed off. By simple shaking, the glycocalyx can be washed off. When such glycocalyx is present, that is called as a slime layer. And on the other hand, when the glycocalyx is arranged as a thick, rigid layer which cannot be easily washed off, that is referred to as a capsule. When you look at the functions of these glycocalyx in different types of bacteria, when it is arranged in the form of slime layer, It is mainly helping the microorganism or the bacteria to attach to surfaces, to adhere to surfaces, and it also prevents dehydration and sometimes stores nutrients also. So this slime layer helps the microorganism to produce biofilms wherever they are attaching. On the other hand, the capsule, wherever it is present, the major function of the capsule is to give protection to the bacterial cell. So when any pathogenic microorganism enters into our body, the macrophages, which are the immune cells, will come and engulf that particular bacteria and they digest it. However, when bacteria contain this capsule, because it is slippery, it can escape from phagocytic activity and thereby it can attach to our cells and cause disease. So the capsule is majorly present in pathogenic microorganisms. Now, if you look at the chemical composition of these glycocalyx, it is mostly made up of polysaccharides. Again, it can be homopolysaccharides or heteropolysaccharides. Example of homopolysaccharides is acetic acid bacteria, where it is made up of single type of sugars, while in case of Streptococcus mutans and Klebsiella pneumoniae, it is made up of different types of sugars and hence it is named as heteropolysaccharide. And some other microorganisms like Bacillus anthracis, the capsule is made up of polypeptides. So when we want to visualize these capsules, when we want to see if a bacterium contains capsule or not, the best method is the negative staining, wherein we use a dye which does not penetrate into the bacteria, rather it actually colors the surrounding. So here we can see that here in the picture we can see that the background and the bacteria are appearing pink, while the capsule which does not take the stain is appearing as bright structure which is present around the bacteria. So the common stains that can be used are India ink, Chinese ink, Negrosin and Congo red. All these stains, they stain the background rather than the microorganism, rather than the capsule. And the next structure is the cell wall or the cell envelope. Now, cell wall is a structure, is a rigid layer and gives shape and rigidity to the cell. If the integrity of the cell wall is lost, it might lead to the death of the cell because the contents will leak outside and it causes the death of the cell. Now, if you look at the cell wall chemically, it is made up of a biochemically unique component called as the peptidoglycan. It is otherwise called as murine or muramic acid or even mucopeptide. And chemically, the peptidoglycan is made up of two important components, the glycan or the sugar and the peptide portion. Glycans again in peptidoglycan are two important types, the NAM and NAG. NAM stands for N-acetyl muramic acid and NAG stands for N-acetyl glucosamine. Now these are present as alternating unit in the cell wall. On the other hand, the peptides are L-alanine, D-glutamic acid, L-lysine or diaminopyrimidic acid and D-alanine. The numbers 1, 2 and 4 are always constant, while the third amino acid is either L-lysine or mesodiaminopyrimidic acid in either gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria. And the unique nature of this peptidoglycan is it contains the D amino acids, while in the normal cells or in generally the cells contain L type of amino acids. Peptidoglycan uniquely contains D type of amino acids. Now let us look at the structure of this in detail. Now here we can see the yellow structures are the NAM, that is N-acetyl muramic acid, while the red color structures are the NAG, that is N-acetyl glucosamine. We can see that they are alternately arranged and they are linked together by these orange lines, which we call it as orange bonds, which we call it as the beta-1,4 glycosidic linkages. Right, so this alternating units and the beta-1,4 glycosidic linkages will form the backbone of the cell wall. And apart from that, the NAM units also are arranged with the peptides, as I had discussed previously. So these are the 4 peptides which are attached to the NAM layer, and we can see here that the third amino acid of one NAM unit is bound to the fourth amino acid of the adjoining adjoining NAM unit. This bridge is called as the pentaglycine bridge. 5 glycine molecules are present in this bridge. So this pentaglycine cross linkages and the beta-1,4 glycosidic linkages will form a cross network, a mesh-like network, which will give the rigidity to the bacterial cell wall. Right. So based upon the amount of the peptidoglycan present in the bacterial cell wall, we can classify the bacteria into two categories: the gram-negative ones and the gram-positive ones. Here we can see that the gram-positive cell wall contains a thick layer of peptidoglycan. Here the gram-positive cell wall contains 90% of peptidoglycan and 10% of teichoic acid, lipoteichoic acid, and a few other sugars. While on the contrary, the gram-negative cell wall, it contains only 10% of peptidoglycan. And apart from peptidoglycan, it contains a membrane called as outer membrane. We can see here that this is the outer membrane. Outwards of the outer membrane, that is towards the outside of the cell, there are certain special structures which is called as the LPS, lipopolysaccharide. Now this LPS or the lipopolysaccharide, it is made up of three important components: lipid A, core polysaccharide, and then O side chain. The lipid A molecule is present inside the cell wall. It is embedded inside the cell wall, and the O side chain is the one which is projecting outside. Now this LPS acts as an endotoxin. That is, whenever gram-negative bacteria enters into the body, the LPS will act as an endotoxin and produce adverse reactions in the host wherever it is entering. Now, apart from that, the outer membrane also contains certain proteins which are called as bronze lipoproteins. We can see here the green colored structures are the bronze lipoproteins. Now, these bronze lipoproteins, they connect the peptidoglycan with the outer layer. The bonding is so strong that even after cell lysis, you cannot separate this outer membrane and the peptidoglycan layer. It is really strong, and it is isolated. Mostly, it is isolated as a single unit. And along with that, there are certain molecules which are called as porin molecules present in the outer membrane. These porin molecules are membrane spamming proteins arranged in sets of 3. So they form pores in the cell wall, and they help in the absorption of the nutrients from the surroundings. So here we can see that the peptidoglycan layer is thick. The gram-positive cell wall layer is a homogeneous layer. 90% it is made up of peptidoglycan. On the other hand, the gram-negative cell wall, it is a heterogeneous layer. It is made up of two different types of layers: the periplasmic space and the outer membrane. Now, when we try to differentiate between gram-positive bacteria and gram-negative bacteria, the gram-positive bacteria, the cell wall is thick, it is homogeneous. On the contrary, in gram-negative bacteria, the cell wall is thin and it is layered. And it contains teichoic acids and other polysaccharides which are absent in the gram-negative bacteria. Instead, they contain phospholipids, proteins, and polysaccharides. And the gram-positive bacteria, because they contain huge amount of peptidoglycan, they are more sensitive to cell wall attacking antibiotics like penicillin. Penicillin breaks the beta-1,4 glycosidic linkages between the NAM and the NAG units. However, the gram-negative bacteria are not sensitive to the cell wall attacking antibiotics because the peptidoglycan layer contributes only 10% to this cell wall. So here again is another depiction of the gram-positive bacterial cell wall, which is mostly made up of peptidoglycan, and the gram-negative bacteria, which contains the thin peptidoglycan layer followed by the outer membrane and a few proteins, and also the LPS molecules which are projecting outside. Now, this next structure that we would like to discuss is the flagella. Now, these flagella are long filamentous structures, and the major function is motility, or the only function of this flagella is to provide motility to the microorganism in response to chemotaxis, be it positive chemotaxis or negative chemotaxis. Now, these filaments or flagella filaments, they are slender and rigid structures, and they have a diameter of about 20 nanometers and a length of about 15 to 20 micrometers. Now these, based upon the arrangement of flagella also, we can identify the bacteria. If the flagella if only one flagellum is present on one side of the bacterium, it is called as monotrichous. If there is a tuft or a group of flagella on one side, it is called as lophotrichous. And if there is two bunches of flagella on either side of the bacteria, it is called as amphitrichous. And if the flagella are distributed evenly all over the surface of the microorganism of the bacterium, they are called as peritrichous. Now, flagella, as I told, they are very slender structures. They cannot normally seen by the normal staining techniques. They cannot be visualized by the light microscope. They need specialized techniques and also specialized microscope for visualization. So before we stain the sample for visualizing the flagella, we have to thicken the flagellum using certain chemical agents, and later on we can add dyes which will give color, and then we can observe the flagellum under sophisticated microscopes. Now, when we look at the ultrastructure of the flagellum, a flagellum is made up of three important components: the basal body, the hook, and the filament. The basal body is a structure which is present inside the cell wall. Now, this basal body contains four rings: S, M, P, and L ring. S, M, P, and L ring. The L ring is associated with the lipopolysaccharides. The P ring is associated with the plasma membrane. The S ring is present on the surface of the surface of the cell membrane, and the M ring is associated with the membranes, with the membrane that is just present above the. It is present between the P ring and the M ring. Now the S ring is associated with two other proteins which are called as MOT proteins and FIL proteins. The S ring, the MOT proteins, and the FIL proteins together form the motor of the flagellum. So whenever ATP is provided, or whenever the flagellum has to move towards or away from stimulus, the FIL proteins, they will provide the energy that is required to control the flagellum, and then the rings will provide the torque that is necessary for the rotation of the flagellum. Now, again, coming to the hook. Now this hook is a structure which is a thick structure, and it attaches the basal body to the flagellar filament. And coming to the filament, it is a thin structure, and it is made up of certain proteins, individual proteins, which are called as flagellin proteins. Now, if you make a cross section of the prokaryotic flagellum, we can see that 8 flagellin proteins are arranged in a circular fashion around a hollow center. The central is hollow. However, in eukaryotes, the flagellin arrangement is in the form of 9+2. That is, 9 flagellin units are arranged on the outside, and the 2 flagellum units are present in the middle of the filament. Right. So again, in like we discussed just now, in gram-positive bacteria, there is no outer membrane. So the gram-positive bacteria contain only the bottom 2 rings, that is the S ring and the M ring. While in gram-negative bacteria, it contains all the 4 rings. And the next structure that we are going to discuss are the fimbriae or pili or spinae. Now, these fimbriae are present in most gram-negative bacteria. They are non-flagellar structures. They are extremely thin and fine appendages, and mostly used for attachment to the surfaces. Wherever the bacterium wants to attach, these fimbriae, they help in adherence to the surfaces and thereby form biofilms. On the other hand, pili or sex pili, as they are called, are the structures which are encoded by certain plasmids present in the cell, and these pili, they form the conjugation tube between two bacterial cells for the transfer of genetic information. So they basically help in conjugation and transfer of the genetic information, thereby modification of the cells. And the third one are the spinae. Now, these spinae are tubular and rigid apparatus They are formed from a single protein, and they are believed to help the bacterium to overcome certain environmental stress conditions like salinity, pH, temperature, and others. And then the next one is the next structure that we study is the plasma membrane. It is otherwise called a cell membrane or cytoplasmic membrane. Now, this plasma membrane, it is the chief point of contact of the cell with the surroundings. Now, it is through the plasma membrane that components can come inside, they can go outside. That is, the nutrients can come inside, the excreted or waste materials can be thrown outside of the cell. The medium is the plasma membrane, and it is about 7.5 nanometers thick, and it is mostly made up of phospholipids and proteins. Now, the phospholipids constitute about 20 to 30%, while the protein component is about 60 to 70%. There are numerous theories which have been proposed to explain this unique nature of the plasma membrane, because it is very selectively permeable. Selectively permeable in the sense it will allow only certain molecules to go in and out of the cell. So the selective property has been best explained by the fluid mosaic model proposed by Singer and Nicholson. So according to this fluid mosaic model, the plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. It consists of phosphates and the lipids in the form of a bilayer structure, and then on this bilayer the proteins are randomly arranged. Now, in this phospholipid bilayer, the phospholipids, we know they are amphipathic in the sense they contain a non-polar end and a polar end. The hydrophobic part is present towards the inside of the phospholipid bilayer, while the hydrophilic part is present, or it is exposed to the outside. So both the hydrophobic ends, they face each other, while both the hydrophilic ends, they are present on the either sides of the this plasma membrane. Now, and between these this phospholipid bilayers, there are proteins which are embedded. Now, these proteins, again, they can be intrinsic proteins or extrinsic proteins. Intrinsic proteins are the membrane spamming proteins, that is, they will cover the whole double membrane, and they are projected towards the outside, and they also project towards the inside of the cell. While on the other hand, the extrinsic proteins are exclusively restricted to the outer membrane. They are present only towards the outside of the cell. And some proteins, they are also form transport structures. They form pores in the cell, and then they have specialized functions, specialized structures whereby they can help in the absorption or the uptake of nutrients from the outside towards the inside of the cell. Now, the next one are the mesosomes. Now, this plasma membrane, not only does it control the movement of molecules, and not only does it give rigidity and flexibility to the bacterial cell, it also performs other functions, like, say, for example, mesosomes. Now, these mesosomes are nothing but invaginations of the plasma membrane, and at these invaginations, the prokaryotic cell performs the respiration and other activities. So on this, the apparatus that is required for the process of respiration, all of these are arranged in the mesosomes. So here so here we can see in this picture that the invagination is a complex invagination when it contains the enzymes required for the respiration. Apart from respiration, the mesosomes also play an important role during cell division. So when a cell is ready to divide, the genetic information, that is the DNA, is also duplicated. The DNA attaches to the cell wall with the help of these mesosomes. So at the site of the mesosomes, the DNA is attached, and then the two daughter molecules of DNA can be separated, which move to the either ends of the cell, and later on the cell will divide in the middle to form two daughter cells. So mesosomes, they help in respiration, and they also help in the cell division. And apart from that, in some phototrophic microorganisms, the plasma membrane forms invaginations which are called as photosynthetic apparatus. So these photosynthetic apparatus, they contain the photosynthetic pigments. and thereby these pigments, they help in the harvesting of the light energy, and the bacterium can perform photosynthesis. So each bacterium has different types of these photosynthetic apparatus. In some it might be like hollow sac like structures, in some it might be a regular parallel layers, or in some it might be stack like structures. So whatever it may be, however the arrangement may be, the main purpose uh, um, is for helping the bacterium to harvest the light energy. So based upon the arrangement of this photosynthetic apparatus also, we can identify what type of microorganism or what type of bacteria it is. And within the cytoplasm, the most important structures that we have are the ribosomes. Now, these ribosomes, in case of prokaryotes, they are designated as 70S. 70S stands for Swedberg unit. The sedimentation coefficient is a 70 here. So here in ribosomes, they are small, they are granular structures, and they have a diameter of about 10 to 20 nanometers. And they are freely lying in the cytoplasm. However, during protein synthesis, these ribosomes, they are arranged together. They come together. That is, the ribosomes consist of two subunits, the larger subunit and the smaller subunit. In case of 70S, that is a prokaryotic ribosome, the larger subunit is called as 50S and the smaller subunit is called as 30S. So the 50S subunit, it contains 5S rRNA and 23S rRNA and 34 different types of proteins, while the smaller subunit, it contains 16S rRNA and 21 different types of proteins. So during protein synthesis, these both subunits, they come together with the help of magnesium ion. So during translation process, the magnesium ion concentration increases in the cell, and it helps in the bringing together of this 30S and the 50S subunit, and the protein synthesis happens. And particularly in prokaryotes, many ribosomes are attached together on the mRNA that is being synthesized. So we all know that in prokaryotes, transcription and translation occur simultaneously. So as the transcription process is ending, the translation process already will be starting from the other end of the mRNA. So these ribosomes are attached onto the mRNA in the form of beads on a chain. So that condition is called as polyribosome or simply polysomes. So on the contrary, the eukaryotic ribosome is called as 80S ribosome, and the larger subunit is the 60S and the smaller subunit is 40S. Now this 60S subunit also contains 5S rRNA, 5.8S rRNA and 28S rRNA, and it also the 40S subunit contains 18S rRNA. Now, when we have to, ribosomes are also important in understanding the phylogenetic relationship between organisms, because these organelles are present in all the living organisms, right from bacteria, right from archaea to the most complex eukaryotic cells contain ribosomes. So, for understanding the phylogenetic relationship, scientists are studying the 16S rRNA these days. So, it is a very trustworthy and method for understanding the relatedness between the microorganisms and the evolution process. And the next one we are going to study are the cytoplasmic inclusion. We know cytoplasm in case of prokaryotes, as I just told you, or as we just discussed already, the cytoplasm is more or less homogeneous because it does not contain different types of organelles as such. It contains these ribosomes, it contains certain inclusion bodies and the genetic material which is present almost in the middle of the cell. So cytoplasm of the prokaryotic cells can be, in a way, can be told as a homogeneous aqueous solution, which consists of soluble proteins, cell solutes, metabolites, and other inorganic ions. Now, this cytoplasm, it contains various types of granules which act as storage regions for the cell to use whenever there is a need. Some examples include polyphosphate, PHB granules, glycogen reserves, gas vacuoles, and magnetosomes. Now, if you look at polyphosphate vacuoles, they are otherwise called as volutin granules or metachromatin granules. Now, certain microorganisms, they accumulate phosphates as polyphosphates. So these polyphosphates, they store the phosphate molecules, and whenever phosphates in the cell, and whenever there is DNA generation, that is when there is DNA that is being duplicated or synthesized, the cell can use the phosphates that are stored in these volatility granules or the metachromatic granules. So we can stain these volatility granules very easily because they are very refractile, and they stain reddish colored when we use a certain blue stains, and can be observed easily under a light microscope. And the second type of granules are the PHB granules, that is poly beta hydroxy butyrate granules. Now these granules, they are produced by the cell during oxygen deprived conditions, that is during anaerobic conditions. And when aerobic conditions come back, the bacteria uses these granules as sources of carbon and energy. Now these PHB granules are lipid-like molecules which are formed by beta hydroxybutyrate linkages joined by the ester linkages. Apart from this, there are also BHA, that is beta hydroxyalkanoate granules, which scientists these days are trying to exploit to use in case of in the place of plastic. So these molecules, they are water resistant, and they can be used as 100% biodegradable plastic. So scientists are working on this right now. And the next granules are the glycogen reserves or the animal starch. Now this glycogen, it is a polymer of glucose units formed by alpha 1,4 glycosidic branches, and which are highly branched and connected by beta 1,6 glycosidic bonds. Now this glycogen acts as the reservoir of carbon and energy when the cell is not able to find these nutrients in the surroundings. The next one is the gas vacuoles. Now, certain bacteria which are particularly living in the moist environments, or in environments where there is in the water bodies, when they're living in the water bodies, they contain small structures which are called as gas vesicles. Now if the bacterium is not able to obtain enough sunlight or enough oxygen, the vesicles fuse to form a gas vacuole, and this gives buoyancy to the cell, and the cell will float to the top of the water body. And when there is enough sunlight, or when there's no need, the vesicles are broken off, the vacuole is broken off into small vesicles, and the bacterial cell will simply sink to the bottom of the water body. So that is how it can maintain, or its availability, depending upon the availability of the oxygen and sunlight, it can either fuse these vesicles to form the vacuole, or simply diffuse the vacuole to form the vesicles. And the next ones are the magnetosomes. Now these magnetosomes are nothing but the inorganic inclusions. They contain magnetite. Now this magnetite or the magnetosomes, they help the bacterium to move towards less oxygen conditions. Now these bacteria which contain the magnetosomes, they grow in areas where there is less oxygen. So not only do they help in the movement, they also help in aligning the bacterium according to the Earth's magnetic field. Aquaspirillum magnetotacticum is one very good example of the microorganism which has these magnetosomes and can align according to the Earth's magnetic field. And another inclusion bodies are the sulfur inclusions. As the name itself tells you, they store sulfur. Some microorganisms store sulfur inside the cell in the granules, and some store it outside. Wherever they store it, they use the sulfur for other metabolic processes during protein synthesis or any other functions. These sulfur granules act as a great reserve. So these bacteria basically grow in environments where there is huge amount of hydrogen sulfide. So they metabolize this hydrogen sulfide, and the sulfur, which is produced as a byproduct of the metabolic process, is stored by the cell to be used for future. And so in the future, the sulfur is converted into sulfate, and it is provided back to the cell. And the next one are the carboxysomes. Now, certain bacteria like the Nitrosomonas and Thiobacillus, they contain these carboxysomes. Now, these carboxysomes, they store the enzymes ribulose 1,5-biphosphate, which is required for carbon dioxide fixation. So, phototrophic microorganisms contain these carboxysomes, which act as storehouses of the enzymes and probably for the fixation of carbon dioxide. And the next organelle that we're going to discuss is the nucleoid or bacterial chromosome. As we told already, it is called as nucleoid, that is nucleus-like, because it does not contain, or the genetic material is not enclosed in a double membrane structure. So the bacterial genetic material or the DNA, it is a single circular double-stranded structure. The bacteria contain a single chromosome, unlike the eukaryotic cells, which contain maybe 2 or 3 chromosomes or even more than that. The bacterial chromosome is a single stranded DNA molecule. So in some organisms, it is in the form of a circle, while in some other microorganism, it is present as a linear structure. Whatever, however it may be, the chemically this DNA, it consists of the genetic material, it consists of 60% DNA, 30% RNA and 10% proteins. So the RNA and proteins, they help the DNA to supercoil itself when it is not dividing. So in the dividing stage, it is in the open form, while in the non-dividing stage, it has to provide space for all the metabolic functions to occur properly. So it is present in a supercoiled structure. So the supercoiled structure was proposed by Warsell and Bury, particularly in E. coli, which has the DNA of the DNA of E. coli, which is around 1400 micrometers length, and then a molecular weight of 3 into 10 to the power of 9 daltons. Warsell and Bury said that this chromosome of E. coli, it is present in a supercoiled structure. And it forms 7 distinct loops. So this is a representation of how in the normal conditions it is in the form of a circle, while in the non-dividing stage it forms the coils and the supercoil. So for the coiling and the supercoiling, the RNA and the proteins, they are of great help. And the next structures are the plasmids. Apart from the genetic material, that is DNA, the certain bacteria, or rather many bacteria, they contain specialized extra nuclear genetic material, which is called as the plasmids. Now these plasmids are small genetic material. They are round structures. They contain their own, they contain the equipment for their own replication. They do not require the cell for their replication. They can duplicate on their own, and they can be transmitted from one bacterium to another bacterium, and they give special characteristics to the bacterial cell. And they are small. Maybe they contain about less than 30 genes, and the molecular weight ranges between 1 to 1000 kilobase pairs. And these plasmids are not required for the bacteria for their survival. However, they play a very important role in providing the bacterium special or new characteristics, which can it can accumulate to new environmental conditions, or it can perform new metabolic processes. All those special characters are given by the plasmids. Now there are certain plasmids which can integrate themselves into the bacterial DNA. Once it enters into the bacterial cell, the plasmid can live separately in the cytoplasm, or it can go and integrate itself reversibly into the DNA of the bacteria. So when it goes and integrates itself into the DNA of the bacterium, it is called as the episome. The property is called as episome. Now, based upon the functions given by the plasmids to the bacterial cell, we can categorize them into 5 broad groups. The first one are the F plasmids or F factors. Now, these F factors are the ones which play a major role in conjugation. They form the pili or the sex pili, which are important for connection between the F plus bacterial cell and the F minus bacterial cell. Now these F plasmids, they are also episomes, that is they can go and bind, they can go and integrate themselves into the bacterial DNA and multiply with the bacterial DNA, and whenever there is a need, they can also simply come out and multiply on their own. So the F plasmids of E. coli are very good example of this. F factors. Now the next plasmids are the R plasmids. Now these plasmids code for resistance against antibiotics. So the microorganisms or the bacteria which contain these resistant plasmids, they can grow even in the presence of antibiotics. And these plasmids, they do not form episomes. They can be easily transferred from one bacterium to another bacterium, and that is the reason bacteria which contain these R plasmids are very difficult, or bacterial infections which are caused by the bacteria which contain R plasmids are really difficult to be cured because they are resistant to antibiotics. So the doctor has to advise for stronger antibiotics or maybe new type of antibiotics, which might again bring side effects to the person that is using them. So plasmid R100 is a very good example of the R plasmid. And the third group of plasmids are the virulence plasmid. As the name itself says, they give virulence to the bacteria wherever they are present. So the bacteria which contain this virulence plasmid or VI plasmids, they make the bacterium even more virulent. So even if they enter into the body in a small numbers, they can cause disease to the person, and they can produce huge amount of toxins with high toxicity also. So the TI plasmid of Agrobacterium tumefaciens is a very good example of this virulence plasmid, as it causes the crown gall disease of angiosperms. The fourth type of plasmid are the col plasmids. Now, certain bacteria, when they dominate in their surrounding by production of certain chemicals. Now, these chemicals kill certain related bacterial species or selective bacterial species. So, in this way, the bacteria which contain this col plasmids, they kill the surrounding bacteria and they dominate in that particular area. So, how do these col plasmids act? The chemicals produced by these col plasmids, they create holes in the bacterial cell wall. They cause damage to the DNA or RNA, and sometimes they also attack the peptidoglycan layer. So that is how they will kill the other bacteria. Good examples are the col-even plasmid present in E. coli, which will produce colicins and kill the other bacteria in the surrounding vicinity. And then lactic acid bacteria also produce colicins which are called as Nisil A, which inhibit the growth of other gram-positive bacteria. So because of this property, these col plasmids or lactic acid bacteria are also used as preservatives in food industries. So the Nisil A, which is produced by these bacteria, it is used commercially to prevent the growth of gram-positive bacteria in packaged foods particularly. And the fifth one are the metabolic plasmids. They give special properties of metabolism to the bacterial cell wherever they are present. They are also called as degradative plasmids because they help the bacterium to degrade unusual components like petrol or plastics or toluene, certain pesticides, certain complex sugars. All of these can be degraded by these metabolic plasmids. The tall plasmid of Pseudomonas foetida and certain other metabolic plasmids which are present in Rhizobium are good examples for this. So scientists these days are exploiting bacteria to introduce certain plasmids which will degrade the plastics, which are really hard to degrade. That's a burning problem causing global warming, right? So scientists are working on, recently it is believed that scientists have found a bacterium which is eating the plastics. So this eating ability of the plasmids is definitely because of the metabolic plasmids. The bacteria might have evolved so that it can degrade these plastics also and use it for its metabolism. And the next structures are the endospores. Now, certain bacteria, particularly rod-shaped bacteria belonging to Bacillus and Clostridium species, they produce certain special structures which are called as endospores. Now, these endospores are produced within the cell by a process which is called as sporulation. Now, this endospores, they are very specialized structures. They give extraordinary property to the cell because they help the cell to survive during excessive environmental stress conditions like ultraviolet radiations, certain gamma radiations, chemical disinfectants, desiccation, and then these endospores, the bacteria which form endospores, they can survive in these forms for about thousands of years. And when favorable conditions come back, they can simply regrow and form normal bacteria or the vegetative cells. So if you look at the structure of the endospores, the outermost layer is the exosporium, which is a thin and delicate covering, and it is made up of proteins. Inner to the exosporium is a thick layer which is called as spore coat, and it is made up of several protein layers. Now this spore coat also contains huge amounts of calcium and dipicolinic acid, which forms a complex. Now this calcium and dipicolinic acid complex is the one which gives resistance to the spores against all the above mentioned stress conditions. And this makes the bacteria and this calcium dipicolinate complex makes the cell impermeable to any kind of chemicals or disinfectants, or for that matter heat and any other thing. And below the spore coat, we have the cortex, which consists of loosely arranged peptidoglycan layer. We know the cell wall of the bacterium contains peptidoglycan, right? So it contains peptidoglycan layer. And below the cortex, we have the core wall, which surrounds the core membrane and the core. Now, the core is otherwise called as spore protoplast. The core is basically made up of the genetic material, which is the DNA, and the cytoplasm, which is in dehydrated form. So because it is present in dehydrated form, it cannot divide. It is in an inactive state, but can become active when the favorable conditions come back. Now, along with the calcium and dipicolinate complex, the spore coat also contains certain proteins which are called as SASPs, that is small acid soluble spore proteins. Now, these spore proteins also help in the maintenance of this endospore in the extreme environmental conditions. And these SASPs, they also bind to the DNA and they stabilize the DNA during these unfavorable conditions. Now, this is how a endospore looks like in reality. Now, this is a representation on the left hand side, and on the right hand side is the real picture of an endospore. It contains the middle core, which is the dehydrated cytoplasm and the genetic information, and then the spore coat and the cortex and the mother cell wall, that is the peptidoglycan layer, which is present here. You can see the loosely arranged peptidoglycan layer. So if you see the process of the sporulation or endospore formation, it is called as sporulation. It is a complex cellular event and includes 7 distinct stages. Now, the first one, the first stage is the DNA replication. So here what happens is the cell that which is exposed to the unfavorable conditions, now it decides that it has to form the endospores because there is no more favorable condition and it might die if it does not produce the endospore. So the first thing that it does is it will duplicate the genetic material. The vegetative cell produces 2 DNA molecules, and then both of these DNA molecules move to either ends of the cell, and then once the DNA molecules are separated to either sides of the cell, an invagination appears on more towards one side of the cell. Now, this is in contrast with the binary fission. During binary fission, a septum or an invagination appears right in the middle of the cell and it divides into 2 equal daughter cells. However, in sporulation, this invagination forms more towards one side. So a larger cell is produced and a smaller cell is produced. The smaller cell is called as the forespore, and the larger cell is designated as the vegetative cell. So this forespore is the one which will in future form the endospore. So here what happens is, once a forespore is formed, that is once the septum is formed between the 2 cells, so this is the smaller cell. You can see this is a smaller cell and this is the larger cell, right? So this smaller cell, the plasma membrane or the cell wall of the larger cell will again engulf the smaller cell. So this is how we get this loosely arranged peptidoglycan layer. So it surrounds or it engulfs the smaller cell. Once it engulfs the smaller cell, you can see that there is a double membrane that is being formed, which we are calling as the cortex. So once the cortex is formed, it will accumulate the calcium and dipicolinic acid to form a calcium dipicolinate complex, which gives the rigidity to the cell. So in the meantime, in the larger cell, that is in the vegetative cell, the DNA that is present, it is degraded into smaller units, and it is disrupted. So once the spore coat is formed properly and the DNA of the larger cell has been degraded, the spore coat, now the spore coat is formed, and then the maturation of the spore coat happens with the accumulation of this SASPs proteins and other proteins, which will stabilize the DNA and also make the spore coat resistant to the outer environmental conditions. So once the spore coat matures up and a proper endospore is formed, the cell will the vegetative cell will lyse, and then it will release the endospore to the outside. However, many of the times the endospore is not actually released outside, but it is present within the vegetative cell. So based upon the location of the endospore and the shape of the endospore also, we can identify different bacterial cells. Say for example, here you can see that the endospore can be spherical and it is present towards one of the corners, oval and present towards the one of the corners, and it can be spherical and present towards one of the corners, and it can be club shaped, that is subterminal. It can be oval and subterminal, and it can be right in the middle of the cell, in the form of oval or in the form of a proper spherical structure. So different types of endospores can be seen. And once the endospores are formed, we can also see that once the endospore passes the unfavorable season, it can also germinate into the normal vegetative cell once the favorable conditions come back. So that process is called as endospore germination. And this endospore germination occurs in 3 distinct stages: activation, commitment, and outgrowth. Activation in the sense due to factors, factors like favorable, it could be presence of water, proper moisture, or it could be presence of the nutrients, or whatever may be, the endospore is activated, or it is triggered to lose the endospore stage and then to form the normal vegetative stage. So here what happens during activation, the core is first activated. So due to various triggers, it can be activated, and then it commits, or it commits to form the endospore. So that stage is called as a commitment. So this commitment stage again can be divided into 2 stages. Stage 1, where the cations are released, the calcium dipicolinate is released outside the cell, and the core is partially hydrated, that is the central core, it takes up water, and loss of resistance happens. And further on, going to the stage 2, where the cortex hydrolysis happens completely, and the core will expand, and the resistance is lost. All the resistance conditions are lost, and finally dormancy also is lost. And this after the commitment stage comes the outgrowth stage, wherein the core, that is the genetic material, takes up all the water, it becomes a normal vegetative cell, and then it starts to divide, and then it will break off the core wall, and then it emerges out as a normal vegetative cell, and it outgrows. So the SASPs are also degraded, and the macromolecules that are required for the normal functioning of the cell, they are also produced, they are also generated. The metabolic processes come back to normal, and it grows to a normal vegetative cell. So that is about the spore formation and spore germination. So in conclusion, in this class we have talked about capsule or the slime layer, which is the protective outer layer of the cell wall, which gives shape and rigidity, the flagella and the fimbriae and pili, which help in motility, attachment, and bacterial mating. We talked about plasma membrane, which is a selective barrier and gives controls the movement of molecules across the cell, and mesosomes, photosynthetic apparatus, and cytoplasmic inclusions, which store various types of nutrients and apparatus which are required for normal functioning of the cell. We talked about the nucleoid, which is the localized genetic material. We talked about plasmids, which give special characteristics to the microorganism. And we also talked about endospores, which help the microorganism to survive under harsh environmental conditions. So let us just revise a few things that we just discussed. The slippery covering, which in some bacteria that protects them from phagocytosis. What is it? Yeah, it is the slime layer or the capsule, majorly the capsule, which is slippery. It protects from the cells from phagocytosis. And the cell wall type that is most vulnerable to the action of penicillin is, yeah, that is the gram-positive bacteria, because peptidoglycan layer is present in huge amounts, and penicillin acts majorly on the beta-1,4 glycosidic linkages between these NAM and NAG units. So the flagella and pili are majorly made up of proteins, flagellin protein and pilin protein, or pilin protein or pilin protein. And endospores, they protect the bacteria from adverse environmental conditions, UV radiations, gamma radiations, and loss of water, loss of nutrients, environmental stress, and all of those things. And the membranous infoldings of bacteria that initiate the DNA replication are the mesosomes. Mesosomes, not only they help in DNA replication, they also help in the respiration process. So I hope this class was useful to you. We'll see you again. Thank you so much.